We continue with other stories in other parts of the world. South Korea's military has said it fired 3 air-to-ground missiles towards north of its maritime border with North Korea today in response to the North missile launches, including one which landed less than 60 kilometers off South Korea's coast. North Korea fired at least 17 missiles into the sea, prompting South Korea to issue rare air raid warnings and launch its own missiles in response. It was the first time a ballistic missile had landed near the South waters and the most missiles fired by the North in a single day. Director of the South Korean National Security Kim Sun-hang said at a news briefing that North Korea continues to provoke tensions on the Korean peninsula while strengthening its nuclear missile programs. He says this cannot be justified for any reason and the responsibility lies entirely on the North Korean side. The missile landed outside of South Korea's territorial waters, but south of the Northern Limit Line, NLL, a disputed inter-Korean maritime border in what South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol called an effective act of territorial encroachment. Meanwhile, the Japanese government has branded North Korea's missile launches as unacceptable after the country launched another missile this afternoon. Shortly after the launch, Japanese State Minister of Defense Shiro Ino told reporters that North Korea fired a potential ballistic missile that flew at an extremely low altitude of less than 50 kilometers and landed outside of Japan's exclusive economic zone, EEZ. Mr. Ino said after they made provocative remarks early the morning today, they fired more than 10 missiles and possibly fired more than 100 artillery rounds towards the Sea of Japan, escalating their provocative actions at a rapid pace. Nuclear-armed North Korea has tested a record number of missiles this year, and officials in Seoul and Washington say the North has completed technical preparations to conduct a nuclear weapon test for the first time since 2017. Well, it's not over. China's foreign ministry says it is closely following the developments of the situation in the Korean peninsula, hoping that all parties involved will stick to the direction of political settlement. It was the first time a ballistic missile had landed near the South waters since the peninsula was divided, and the most missiles fired by the North in a single day. South Korea issued rare air raid warnings and also launched its own missiles in response. Chinese spokesperson Zhao Lijiang also said that it is in the common interest of the region to maintain peace and stability on the peninsula and resolve each other's concerns in a balanced manner through dialogue and consultation. He says he hopes that all parties concerned will stick to the direction of the political settlement of the Korean peninsula issue and meet each other halfway to prevent the situation from escalating. And to all the stories, we are learning more about the terrible stampede that killed more than 100 people in South Korea over the weekend. Reports say the first emergency call about trouble at Itaewon came in the early evening of October 29th. A total of 11 calls were made to South Korea's 112 emergency police hotline, begging them to control the crowds before the crash happened. Police have launched an investigation into the incident, and on Tuesday, the chief acknowledged not enough was done to prevent the incident.
Days after the disaster that crushed the emotions of many in the country and around the world, South Koreans are mourning the deaths of more than 150 people in a Halloween party crush. Many of them, though not directly involved, are dealing with trauma and a search for answers that has at times blamed the victims. Footage of events that day have been making the rounds on social media. Some showing emergency rescue officials and citizens giving cardiopulmonary resuscitation to unconscious victims. 75-year-old Hwang Jong-soon went to the memorial altar set up in front of Seoul City Hall to mourn for the victims. She said she'd been watching the news over and over and feeling so sad and depressed as the disaster was too hard to comprehend. 18-year-old Kim Bom-jin is a resident of Itaewon. He was there when the crash happened. He says recurring memories of the disaster have left him unable to eat or sleep. He was among those who received counseling at a mobile clinic in Itaewon run by the National Center for Disaster and Trauma. On Tuesday, the country's chief of police admitted the existence of bungled preventive measures toward the deadly crowd crush. Commissioner General of the National Police Agency, Yoon Hee-kyun, told a parliamentary committee that although the police had received 11 emergency calls alerting danger and urgency at the scene from 6:34 p.m. local time on the day of the stampede, they'd only taken incomplete preventive measures. About 100,000 people were estimated to have been at Itaewon on Saturday for the country's biggest no-mask outdoor Halloween event since the outbreak of the COVID pandemic in 2020. The police said there were only 130 plus officers at Itaewon at the time, and that their main task was to monitor drug crimes and other violations rather than maintain order. The police did not have any specific precautionary plan for that night's event. Seoul Mayor Oh Si-hoon made a tearful apology during a media briefing on Tuesday. He said the city government would deploy all available administrative resources to assist local residents. The country will be mourning all through this week for those killed, most of them young, and among them, actor Lee Ji-han, the 24-year-old who made his first debut in the public eye on a South Korean reality television show in 2017 and acted in a Korean drama in 2019. He was buried on Monday, October 31st.
And he might be coming back into office. I'm talking about the former Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The 73-year-old is said to be on the brink of a dramatic comeback after partial results showed he was on course to win a majority in parliament with the far right's help. The percent of votes in the general election have been counted, and Netanyahu's bloc is said to win 65 out of 120 seats. For him to win, however, it will depend on how quickly he is able to win the support of the ultra-nationalist religious Zionism party.
The former Israeli Prime Minister says his right-wing religious camp is on the course of a great election win, as exit polls predict his bloc gaining a slim parliamentary majority that would pave the way for his comeback. Speaking to the supporters earlier today, the smiling Netanyahu said, "We have won a huge vote of confidence from the people of Israel." Netanyahu's record 12-year consecutive reign ended in June 2021 when centrist Yair Lapid managed to switch together a fragile alliance of liberals, rightists and an Arab party for the first time, which unrivaled a year into its rule. The country's longest-serving premier is on trial over corruption charges, which he denies. He will wait until final results were in. The early efforts may differ from the final result of the election, which is not expected until later in the week. But the results point to a strong showing by the right, which had been seen falling just short of a majority. The fifth election in less than 4 years exasperated many voters, but turnout was nonetheless reported at the highest levels since 1999. The campaign was shaken up by far-right firebrand Itamar Ben-Gvir and his ultra-nationalist religious Zionism list, now poised to be the third largest party in parliament after surging in from the political margins. The prospect of a government including Ben-Gvir, a former member of Kach, a group on Israel and U.S. terrorist watch list, and who was once convicted for racist incitement, risks alarming allies, including Washington. In the meantime, continuing price hikes in the country are becoming a concern for many residents who have felt the pinch of the increasing cost of living as daily expenses become a burden. The scale of impact is evident in the cost of everyday items, with the price of bread going up nearly 30% in some areas earlier this year. In July, the Israeli government issued strict measures to limit prices, which did manage to reduce costs.
You know, the living cost in Israel is very expensive. For example, I'm a lawyer in Israel. My wife, she's a social worker. We both work morning till afternoon, and our salary is going for food, for fruits, for living, for rent, for everything. We cannot make money.
Costs are rising throughout the economy. Food, materials, gas, pretty much every commodity that we purchase and buy, the costs are rising. Our average earnings relative to the cost is not as good. In other words, at the end of a month, many of the average Israelis can't finish the month without an overdraft.
The food in the supermarket is so high, and the milk, the bread. I have 3 children, and it's a problem for me to pay it.
Israel is highly dependent on imports of raw materials and daily goods, which makes the country easily affected by the global market. Meanwhile, the prices of agricultural products, healthcare, furniture, energy and housing have kept rising over the past year.
And VOA's Linda Gratstein joins me now from Jerusalem. Hi, Linda. Good to see you. So tell us, is voting over? We understand that former Israeli Prime Minister Mr. Netanyahu looks set to, essentially declare a return to power.
Yes, voting is basically over, except for what's called the double envelopes. There are about 500,000 votes of soldiers and policemen and diplomats. But given the numbers that we've seen so far, that's not going to make much of a difference. So basically, Netanyahu is on track to form the next government with probably 65 seats out of 120 in the Knesset. Now, again, this is the 5th election in less than 4 years, and the first 4 elections were kind of inconclusive, and there was really a deadlock. And I think that Israelis sort of felt like they want a stable government. Netanyahu is personally very popular. He's seen as being able to deal with security more than the caretaker Prime Minister Yair Lapid. And it comes as there was sort of a wave of Palestinian attacks in the last few months. So, and among tensions between Israelis and Palestinians. So I think that, the country has definitely moved to the right. But as you mentioned in the earlier report, Itamar Ben-Gvir is definitely sort of the new force in Israeli politics.
So this would really mark, a sort of remarkable resurrection for Mr. Netanyahu, whose 12-year premiership ended March 2021 after his opponents, united to kick him out. Many wonder what really changed.
So that's a good question. What really changed? I'm not sure how much really changed, but I think that it was sort of a vote between Netanyahu, who was kind of a known quantity and who is seen as strong on security, who's seen as very, very experienced. Israelis didn't seem to care about the corruption charges against him. And the government that Yair Lapid, who was prime minister for just 4 months, it was called the government of change. And it was a rotation government. And it just kind of wasn't able to take off, although many people say that it was actually running day-to-day affairs very well. But because the way Israeli politics are set up, you need to get to that magic number of 61 out of 120. And Netanyahu has done that very well, and now, in fact, has 65. So it's a vote for the right wing. It's a vote for stability. And there is concerns among many Israelis that it might be a vote against democracy.
So we're seeing this, the 5th in less than 5 years, which seem to show a reduction in support, you mentioned, for the centrist current Prime Minister, Mr. Lapid and his allies. But then give us an idea of how, the elections work. Some wonder about the costs and if this frequency could occur in the next 5 years.
So I don't think, I mean, usually elections are supposed to be held once every 4 years. That rarely happens, but this kind of frequency of 4 elections in 5 years, it's quite expensive. It's a day off for the Israeli public. Yesterday, the weather's still warm here, and a lot of people, the voter turnout was quite high, especially in Jewish areas, and people voted and then went to the beach. But I think there's a sense that people wanted, and they said enough with elections. They want to see a stable government that can hold together for at least 2 or 3 years.
If we go back talking about Netanyahu's bloc, are there still plans to remove the offense of fraud and breach of trust for which Mr. Netanyahu is on trial from the criminal code?
So that's one of this religious Zionism party is headed by 2 people, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who you've mentioned. It's actually a union between 2 parties, and Bezalel Smotrich, who wants to become the new justice minister. And he has already said that he will put forward a law that would make fraud and breach of trust not criminal offenses. I mean, basically, there is, Israeli analysts say, there is a good chance that this government will, its first order of business will be trying to cancel Netanyahu's trial to make sure that he doesn't go to jail, and that its second one will be trying to take over a lot of the power of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, which has been very active, is seen as kind of a left-wing, anti-Netanyahu, perhaps. And so there's some concern that they will pass a law, for example, saying that the Knesset can overturn a ruling by the Supreme Court. But that seems to be what this government will, be dealing with. And there's also concern about what will happen between Israel and the Palestinians. Ben-Gvir has called for a much harder line. He's called for the army to be able to fire on stone throwers. He's called for the death penalty for terrorists. So I think that we might see a hardening of attitudes towards the Palestinians as well.
Palestinian parties, I mean, will these ready votes affect Palestinians in the occupied region?
Of course it will. First of all, you have to make a distinction between Arab citizens of Israel, who are about 20% of the population, and what happened in the outgoing government. They joined the government for the first time in Israel's history. A party called Ram by Mansour Abbas. That party did get in this time, but another Arab party did not get in. So because of what seems to have happened in general is that the votes on the left were more split and more fractured, and the votes on the right had fewer parties and were more unified. And Israel has a law that if you get below 3.25%, then you don't get into the Knesset at all. Now, there is a left-wing party called Meretz, which has been part of the government for many, many years, and usually has 4, 5, 6 seats in the parliament, and they got 3.20, so they fell just short of that 3.25 threshold. And they are a party that has advocated for a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza for negotiations with the Palestinians. So that's another big change in this election. Now, in terms of Arab citizens of Israel, I don't think it will make much of a difference. In terms of Palestinians living in the West Bank and Gaza, it certainly will, because if Israel tightens its policies in terms of allowing Palestinians to come work in Israel, if the terrorist attacks continue, it's possible that they will even call for a widespread military operation. I'm not sure if that'll happen, but Ben-Gvir is on record as saying that he wants a very hard line against the Palestinians.
Linda, thank you for that update. VOA's Linda Gradstein joining me from Jerusalem. Welcome back. Let's turn to developments surrounding the upcoming midterm elections. Yesterday, President Joe Biden warned voters in Florida that their democracy is on the ballot. He was addressing potential voters at a campaign rally on his first trip in office to the Sunshine State in support of Democratic governorship candidate Charlie Crist, who is running against current Governor Ron DeSantis And for Democratic senatorial candidate Val Demings, who will be vying for the seat occupied by Republican Marco Rubio. Democratic strategists worry that Florida, a closely contested political theater for decades, is starting to decidedly lean Republican. They hope to push back against that trend by making a campaign issue out of purported risks to popular health and retirement benefit programs. In recent weeks, the White House has lowered its earlier optimism about the midterms, and administration officials say they are now worried Democrats could lose control of both chambers of Congress. Several key state governor races are also contested.
Democrats get elected to keep control, but their extremism isn't limited to social programs in the economy. They're coming after your right to vote and who get to count the vote. No, for real. You got 350 so election deniers on the ballot on the Republican ticket. No, this is really deadly earnest, man. Democracy is on the ballot this year, along with your right to choose and the right to privacy. The bottom line is this. If Republicans gain control of the Congress and pass a nationwide ban on abortion, I'll veto it. But if Val Demings and more Senate Democrats get elected to keep control of the Senate and the House, we're going to codify Roe v. Wade in January. There are bright spots where America is reasserting itself. We've made enormous progress in just 20 months. We have so much more to do. Everything is at stake in just 7 days, God willing, for the state and this country that we love. So I call on Democrats and mainstream Republicans and independents to come together. We can meet the moment together. I truly believe we're just getting started. I've never been more optimistic about America's future than today. We just have to remember who we are. We're the United States of America. And there's nothing beyond our capacity. So vote. Get out to vote and win. Vote, vote, vote. May God bless you. May God protect our troops. God love you all. I mean it. Let's go. Let's do it. No excuses.
Meanwhile, black voters in Wisconsin are expected to make their voices heard in the midterms. The state is considered to be a swing state, notable for voters switching to Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden in the 2020 elections, albeit by a narrow margin. Aiming for success in the upcoming polls is Democratic Senate candidate Mandela Barnes, currently the state's lieutenant governor, who is hoping to become Wisconsin's first black senator. In one of his campaigns, he attended a meet and greet attended by community and business leaders in Kenosha. The community was thrust into the world spotlight after a white police officer shot Jacob Blake, a black man. The shooting sparked outrage and caused days of unrest and further stoked racial tensions, coming just months after the murder of George Floyd by a police officer in the neighboring state of Minnesota.
The George Floyd and then Jacob Blake shooting just gave everybody at home a refresher course on racism that has dealt with African Americans for many hundreds of years in the United States. We believe the quote-unquote uprising in 2020 has really led to hopefully making a correction in the way we do business in the United States.
We're just so numb to all the situations that happen to black and brown people. And we want to go throughout all the different communities and just try to, you know, ramp up the excitement and just to get the word out that you can go cast your ballot and it will be safe.
I will be loud with my vote, with my voice, the one that I have, with my influence, with my business that supports everybody in Kenosha, with my efforts and with my organizations. I'm going to make sure that I speak up. And if I'm silent, then that's just being a part of the problem.
Well, just one more story before we leave the United States, and this concerns a shooter who injured 2 police officers on Tuesday in Newark, New Jersey. Officers were responding to a 911 call from a caller who said he had identified a suspect from a previous shooting that happened on October 28. Newark's Mayor Ras Baraka said officers encountered the assailant in the parking lot As they were leaving the building, the assailant fired an undetermined number of shots to the officers. Officers say that the shooter is still at large and a SWAT team has been sent to the building to locate him while going from apartment to apartment.
Upon leaving the building, they encountered the gentleman. They gave him instructions. There was a brief altercation. The gentleman pulled a gun out, shot 2 police officers at close range. Gunshot was returned, fire was returned. The gentleman retreated back into the building. We are right now clearing the building out. Mostly all of the residents have been cleared out of the building already.
Well, the stories now. Authorities in China have locked down a district in Zhengzhou City, which hosts the world's largest iPhone factory under the country's strict coronavirus measures. Today, local authorities said the lockdown of the airport economy zone would start immediately and end at midday local time on November 9. Public transport services have been suspended and people advised to work from home. This according to an official notice on the WeChat social media platform. Officials said they would resolutely crack down on all kinds of violations of regulations. And 5 lions were returned to their enclosures at a Sydney zoo after escaping early today. A spokesperson for the New South Wales State Police said officers were called in just after 7 a.m. after an alarm was activated at Taronga Zoo. 4 of the lions made their way back into their main exhibit calmly, and 1 lion cub was safely tranquilized. This according to the director of the zoo. No one was injured and the zoo will open as normally. Taronga Zoo is home to 7 lions, including 5 cubs and 2 adults. This according to the website. On the program, a group of police officers disguised as superheroes captured members of a family allegedly engaged in drug dealing in Lima. Agents disguised as Spider-Man, Captain America, Thor and Catwoman entered the house of a family of alleged drug dealers and thieves by breaking down the door of their home with a hammer. Local authorities reported the costumes were employed so the anti-drug officers could go unnoticed by the neighborhood residents. Officers pretended to be entertainers attending a show at a nearby school. Police colonel in charge of the operation, David Villanueva, said the family was engaged in the micro-commercialization of drugs and mobile phone robbery. 4 people were detained during the operation known as Marvel. Peru is second largest producer of coca leaf and cocaine after neighboring Colombia. Operation Marvel over and out. That's our show this evening. Thank you for watching.